All right. 5 more true-false questions like yesterday's warm-up. Number 1, all rectangles are parallelograms. Is that true or false? That is true. A rectangle is a parallelogram that has 4 right angles. All squares are rectangles. That is true. To be a rectangle, you have to be a parallelogram with 4 right angles. A square is a parallelogram with 4 right angles, and then it also has 4 congruent sides. Number 3, all rhombuses are squares. False. Both rhombuses and squares have 4 congruent sides, but a rhombus is not required to have 4 right angles, whereas a square is. Number 4, all squares are parallelograms. True. All rhombuses are parallelograms. True. Nice work. All right, go ahead and turn in your homework and your warm-up. And then in your notes packet, we're going to be on the very, very, very back page, which is page 12, where we have this quadrilateral family tree. And we have some more questions that we're going to evaluate to see which ones are true, which ones are false. Before we get into answering which questions over here or which statements are true and which are false, I want to look at this family tree for just a moment with you. If we are moving from a shape that's on the top of the family tree and we're going down to the bottom, like all quadrilaterals are squares. So if we're moving down, that would be a sometimes situation. So a quadrilateral is sometimes a rectangle, would be true. We can have a 4-sided shape that is a rectangle, but not all 4-sided shapes are rectangles. So sometimes a quadrilateral is a rectangle, sometimes a quadrilateral is a trapezoid, sometimes a quadrilateral is a kite or a rhombus. If we are moving up on the quadrilateral family tree, that is an always situation. So for example, a square is always a parallelogram. An isosceles trapezoid is always a trapezoid or is always a quadrilateral. If you're starting with a shape on the bottom and you're comparing it to a shape that's further up, that will always be true. A rhombus is always a kite, yes. So I want to look at that for just a minute. We did just learn about kites yesterday. The definition for a kite is that we have to have 2 pairs of adjacent sides that are congruent. Well, a rhombus has these 2 sides congruent. Those are touching, so they're adjacent. And it has these 2 sides congruent. They're touching, so they would be adjacent. So a rhombus has 2 pairs of congruent adjacent sides, so that meets the definition for a kite. But a rhombus is also a parallelogram, so opposite sides are parallel and congruent, and that's not true for a kite. Yes, yes you may. So yes, a rhombus is always a kite, but a kite is only sometimes a rhombus. All right, let's see if we can figure out which of these are true. A quadrilateral is always a square. False. What word could I change to make it true? Yes, we can change always to sometimes. Sometimes a quadrilateral is a square. Sometimes a quadrilateral is a trapezoid. A rectangle is sometimes a rhombus. A rectangle is sometimes a rhombus. False. That one is not true. A square is sometimes a trapezoid. A square is sometimes a trapezoid. No. A square is always a parallelogram. Yes. A kite is sometimes a hexagon. A kite is sometimes a hexagon. False. How many sides does a kite have? 4 sides. How many sides does a hexagon have? 6. I will never have a 4-sided shape that is sometimes a 6-sided shape. A parallelogram is sometimes a rectangle. True. A parallelogram is sometimes a rectangle. We're going from here and we're moving down, so that would be a sometimes situation. All right, I want to look at the box at the bottom because this is dealing with a lot of the properties that we have, and I want to see if we can classify the different types of quadrilaterals, our 6 quadrilaterals, by whether or not they have these different properties. Which of my quadrilaterals has congruent diagonals? Rectangles have congruent diagonals. Anything else? Squares. You had it for me, darling. You need to be doing this with us. This is our notes. So a rectangle, a square, any other shapes? There's one more. It's one of the recent ones that we talked about in the last 2 days. Not a rhombus, not a kite. An isosceles trapezoid, where my 2 legs are congruent. An isosceles trapezoid. Which shapes have diagonals that bisect each other? A kite has 1 set. We're going to put that guy down at the bottom. Which shapes have both diagonals that bisect each other? Parallelogram. And then we had some other shapes that are technically parallelograms, so they would also have diagonals that bisect. What are some of those other shapes? Rectangle. What else? A rhombus. And I know of one more. A square. In a rectangle, a rhombus, and a square, both diagonals bisect each other. And in a kite, the shorter diagonal gets bisected, but not the longer one. Which shapes have diagonals that are perpendicular, that form right angles? Which one? Kite. What else? Square. And there's one more. A rhombus. So our 2 shapes that have 4 congruent sides, and then also kites. Which shapes of ours have opposite sides that are congruent, the same length? Parallelogram. And so since it's true for a parallelogram, it would have to be true for what other shapes, because they are special types of parallelograms. Rectangle. What else? Rhombus. And a square. Did we talk about any shapes where one pair of opposite sides is congruent? An isosceles trapezoid. An isosceles trapezoid has congruent legs. A kite doesn't have opposite sides congruent, but it does have what? Adjacent sides congruent. Which shapes have opposite sides that are parallel? Parallelogram. What else? Rectangle. Any others? What am I sending you for? What am I sending you for? Okay. What other shapes have opposite sides that are parallel? A rhombus. Any others? A square. Are there any shapes that we've talked about where only one pair of sides are parallel? A trapezoid. Our bases are parallel. And then our last little box, which shapes have sides, not diagonals, but sides that are perpendicular? A rectangle and a square, yes. Very nice work. All right. We have about 15 minutes left that you guys have to work on your test review that you should have picked up on your way in the door today. So I'd like you to spend the remainder of the class period working on your test review. I'm happy to answer questions. You may work with a partner if you'd like to. You can quietly listen to music on your headphones or your earbuds if you would like while you work on the review. Monday, I'm going to have a game for us to play to help us continue reviewing. And then on Tuesday, I'll take any questions you guys have over the review. And then we will take your test on Wednesday. All right. Please let me know if you guys have any questions at all.